The diner went dead silent when Lawrence Bianchi's tailored Oxfords hit the linoleum. He owned the city's darkest corners, and now he wanted the booth where a frail woman slept. But her daughter, a waitress drowning in medical debt, stepped between them. What happened next left everyone breathless. The air inside the Brass Lantern diner was thick with the smell of cheap frying oil, stale black coffee, and the faint metallic scent of impending rain. Outside, the Chicago sky had bruised into a deep, stormy purple. Inside, Claw Jenkins was wiping down the laminate counter for the 4th time in an hour, her hands raw and smelling of bleach. She was 24, but the dark, bruised bags under her hazel eyes and the rigid line of her shoulders made her look a decade older. In the back corner of the diner, tucked away in booth 9, the one with the torn red vinyl patched with duct tape, lay Beatrice Jenkins. Claw's mother was bundled in a thick wool blanket, despite the diner's stifling heater. Beatrice was in end-stage renal failure. Her skin held a translucent, waxy pallor, and her breathing was a shallow, rattling sound that kept Claw's heart in a perpetual state of panic. With the crushing weight of medical bills from Mercy General Hospital and the recent eviction notice from their landlord, Claw couldn't afford the home care nurse today. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, a gruff but soft-hearted man, had allowed Beatrice to sleep in the back booth during Claw's double shift. "Order up, Claw," yelled Tommy, the line cook, sliding a plate of greasy eggs and hash browns onto the pass. Claw nodded, plastering on a tired, practiced smile as she carried the plate to a trucker at the counter. As she poured him a refill of coffee, the bell above the diner's glass door chimed. But it wasn't the usual cheerful jingle. The door was pushed open with such force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the glass. The ambient chatter of the diner died instantly. Even the sizzling of the grill seemed to hush. 3 men walked in. The 2 flanking the rear were built like freight trains, dressed in sharp, dark suits that bulged slightly at the chest and waistlines. But it was the man in the center who pulled the air out of the room. Lawrence Bianchi. Claw recognized him immediately, not from the society pages, but from the hushed, terrified whispers of the neighborhood. He was the head of the Bianchi Syndicate, a man whose legitimate front, a sprawling real estate and logistics empire, barely concealed a ruthless, blood-soaked grip on the city's underworld. He wore a charcoal Brioni suit that fit him with predatory perfection, a Patek Philippe watch glinting at his wrist. His dark hair was swept back, and his eyes, a cold, piercing obsidian, swept over the diner with the casual entitlement of a king inspecting his domain. Mr. Henderson dropped a ceramic mug behind the counter. It shattered, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. But Lawrence didn't even flinch. Lawrence stepped further into the diner, his heavy Oxfords clicking against the checkered linoleum. His gaze bypassed the empty tables at the front and locked dead onto the back corner. Booth 9, the only booth that offered a clear, tactical view of both the front entrance and the kitchen fire exit. It was a known fact among the diner's regulars that when the Bianchi crew occasionally stopped in, Booth 9 was theirs. Unspoken, unwritten, but absolute law. One of his massive bodyguards, a man with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow named Matteo, stepped forward. He snapped his fingers at Mr. Henderson. "Clear the back booth." Mr. Henderson, trembling, wiped his hands on his dirty apron and looked at Claw with sheer panic. I'll get it sorted, Mr. Bianchi. Just give me 1 second. Henderson scurried out from behind the counter and speed-walked toward the back. Claw's blood ran cold. She watched her boss reach out to shake her mother awake. Beatrice was in the middle of a brutal medication crash. Waking her prematurely caused her excruciating nausea and disorientation. "Don't touch her," Claw's voice rang out. The words left her mouth before her brain could catch up to the sheer suicidal stupidity of the act. The entire diner gasped collectively. Even the trucker at the counter slowly pushed his plate away, not wanting to draw attention to himself. Mr. Henderson froze, his hand hovering inches from Beatrice's frail shoulder. "Claw, please," he hissed under his breath. "Are you insane? It's them." Claw dropped her rag on the counter. Her legs felt like lead, but a protective, primal fire erupted in her chest. She walked past the empty tables, placing herself squarely between the towering Mafia boss and the booth where her mother slept. She was 5'4", drowning in an oversized pink diner uniform, but she stood her ground. Lawrence Bianchi stopped a mere 3 feet away from her. Up close, he was terrifyingly still. He smelled of rain, expensive cedarwood cologne, and something distinctly metallic. "Move!" Matteo growled, stepping forward to swat Claw aside like a nuisance fly. Lawrence raised a single, gloved finger. Matteo instantly froze and stepped back, eyes lowered. Lawrence tilted his head, his dark eyes analyzing Claw. He wasn't used to defiance, not from rival bosses, and certainly not from a waitress with a plastic name tag pinned crookedly to her chest. "That booth is mine," Lawrence said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that didn't need to be raised to convey absolute authority. "The woman is sleeping. She can sleep at the counter." "She is heavily medicated," Claw said, her voice shaking violently despite her desperate attempts to keep it steady. "She has stage 4 renal failure. Her joints ache, and she is shivering. I am not moving her to a hard stool, so you can sit in a specific corner." "Claw," Mr. Henderson squeaked, practically weeping now. "Mr. Bianchi, I apologize. She's just stressed. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I know exactly what I am saying," Claw interrupted, her eyes never leaving Lawrence's. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the stories. Men had disappeared in this city for looking at Lawrence Bianchi the wrong way. But the thought of her mother, frail and in pain, being dragged out of a warm bed into the cold reality of their destitution, pushed Claw past the point of fear. "There are 12 other empty booths in this diner. Take your pick, but you are not touching my mother." Matteo reached inside his suit jacket. Claw closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, bracing for the end of it all. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Claw kept her eyes squeezed shut, her arms spread slightly to shield the booth behind her. She waited for the rough hands, the cold steel, the violence she had just invited upon herself. "Matteo, stand down." The command was soft but absolute. Claw opened her eyes slowly. Lawrence hadn't moved to strike her. Instead, his gaze had shifted past her shoulder, landing on the sleeping form of Beatrice. He stared at the yellowed tint of Beatrice's skin, the thin, bluish lips, and the way her chest struggled to rise beneath the heavy wool blanket. For a fraction of a second, the impenetrable mask on Lawrence Bianchi's face cracked. A flicker of something entirely unreadable. Pain, recognition, ghostly grief flashed through his dark eyes before his expression hardened back into polished marble. "Kidney failure?" Lawrence asked, his voice entirely devoid of its previous icy edge. Claw blinked, thrown off balance by the question. "Yes. Stage 4. Lawrence stared at Claw. He took in her frayed uniform, the cheap, scuffed sneakers on her feet, and the fierce protective fire blazing in her exhausted eyes. It was the look of someone backed into a corner with nothing left to lose but the person they loved. He slowly buttoned his suit jacket. The entire café held its breath, expecting him to give the order to burn the place down. "We sit at the counter," Lawrence announced loudly, turning his back on Claw. Matteo and the other bodyguard exchanged a look of pure shock, but didn't dare question him. They followed Lawrence to the front counter, taking the 3 stools furthest from the door. The collective exhale in the brass lantern was audible. Mr. Henderson leaned against the wall, clutching his chest. Claw stood frozen, her legs trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of booth 9 to keep from collapsing. She had just stared down the devil, and the devil had decided to sit at the counter. For the next 45 minutes, the diner operated in a state of surreal, terrifying quiet. Lawrence ordered a black coffee. He didn't speak to his men, and he didn't look back at Claw. Claw moved mechanically, serving tables, her mind spinning with a cocktail of adrenaline and confusion. When Lawrence finally stood up to leave, he didn't ask for the check. He simply reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a silver money clip, and dropped a stack of $100 bills on the laminate counter. He turned and walked out, his men shadowing him instantly. The heavy glass door swung shut, the bell jingling cheerfully, mocking the tension left in the room. Claw rushed to the counter to clean up his cup. Beneath the saucer, she found the stack of bills. It had to be at least $2,000, but it was what lay beneath the money that made the blood drain from her face entirely. It was a sleek, matte black business card. On the front, embossed in silver lettering, was a single name, Lawrence Bianchi. On the back, handwritten in sharp, elegant cursive, was a note. Apex Holdings. Account number 449-B. I know who you are, Claw Jenkins. Keep your mother warm. Claw choked back a gasp, dropping the card as if it had burned her fingers. Apex Holdings. It was the predatory payday loan company her ex-boyfriend, Tyler, had used to borrow $30,000 under Claw's name before vanishing into thin air. It was the debt that was currently suffocating her, the debt that had led to the eviction notice taped to her apartment door that very morning. The relentless, threatening phone calls she received daily were from Apex, and Lawrence Bianchi owned it. He didn't back down out of pity. He backed down because he already owned her. Claw, are you okay? Mr. Henderson rushed over, seeing her pale face. He looked at the cash on the counter, and his eyes bugged out. Good Lord. I need to sit down, Claw whispered, sliding the money and the card into her apron pocket. Her mind raced. Did he come here specifically for her? Was this a warning? Before she could process the terrifying revelation, the diner door burst open again. This time, it wasn't a calculated, intimidating entrance. It was chaotic. Tyler Brooks stood in the doorway, soaked from the rain that had finally begun to pour outside. He looked disheveled, high, and desperate. His eyes darted wildly around the diner before locking onto Claw. Claw! Thank God! Tyler slurred, marching toward her. He completely ignored the stares of the few remaining customers. Tyler, what are you doing here? Claw hissed, instinctively stepping backward. You need to leave. I need cash, Clary. Now, he demanded, reaching across the counter to grab her wrist. His grip was painfully tight. The guys from Apex, they found me. They say if I don't give them $5,000 by tonight, they're gonna break my legs. You have to give me your tips. Open the register. Are you out of your mind? Claw yanked her arm, but Tyler held on, his face twisting into something ugly and violent. I put the loan in your name. They're coming for you next if I don't pay them. Open the damn register. Tyler screamed, raising his other hand as if to strike her. Claw squeezed her eyes shut, but the blow never came. Instead, a sickening crunch echoed through the diner, followed by a gargled scream from Tyler. Claw opened her eyes to see Tyler on the floor, clutching his bleeding nose, writhing in agony. Standing over him, looking entirely unbothered, was Matteo. Lawrence's men hadn't left. They had been waiting outside. Matteo reached down, grabbing Tyler by the collar of his soaked jacket, lifting him effortlessly off the floor. Tyler was sobbing, his previous bravado entirely shattered. "Mr. Bianchi doesn't like noise," Matteo said in a deadpan voice. He looked at Claw, giving her a curt, respectful nod. "And he certainly doesn't like vermin touching things that belong to him." Things that belong to him. The words sent a cold shiver down Claw's spine. Matteo dragged Tyler backward toward the diner doors. Tyler kicked and screamed, begging for Claw to help him, but the second bodyguard stepped forward, delivering a swift, brutal punch to Tyler's gut that silenced him instantly. They hauled the limp ex-boyfriend out into the rain, throwing him into the back of a black SUV that was idling by the curb. Claw stood frozen behind the counter, her hand resting over the apron pocket that held the heavy stack of cash and the black business card. She looked back at booth 9. Her mother was still sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware that their lives had just been violently derailed, pulled from the frying pan directly into the inferno. Lawrence Bianchi didn't just know about her debt. He had just claimed her. The rain had not stopped falling on Chicago, washing the gritty streets in a relentless grey downpour. Claw didn't sleep a single minute that night. She sat rigidly in the sagging armchair of her cramped, drafty apartment, staring at the black business card resting on her chipped coffee table. Her mother slept in the bedroom, her breathing still dangerously shallow. Claw expected a knock on the door. She expected Matteo and the other thugs to come back, demand the money, or demand something far worse. But the night passed in suffocating silence. At 7 a.m., the knock finally came. Claw jumped, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the kitchenette. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. It wasn't Lawrence's men. It was 2 paramedics, flanked by a man in a crisp white medical coat. She cracked the door open, her heart hammering. "Can I help you?" "Claw Jenkins," the man in the coat asked. He flashed an ID badge. "I'm a transport coordinator from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. We have orders to transfer Beatrice Jenkins to our specialized nephrology wing immediately." Claw dropped the skillet, the heavy metal clattering against the cheap linoleum floor. "I didn't call for a transport. We don't have insurance for Northwestern. We barely have Medicaid. The financial authorization has already been cleared, Miss Jenkins," the coordinator said gently but firmly, signaling the paramedics to bring the stretcher inside. "We need to move quickly. Her new attending physician is waiting." Within an hour, the bleak, terrifying reality of their poverty was stripped away and replaced by a dizzying, sterilized dreamscape. Beatrice was not taken to a crowded, noisy ward. She was wheeled into a private, sunlit corner suite on the top floor of Northwestern Memorial. The room smelled of fresh linen and expensive antiseptic, the machinery monitoring her mother's failing kidneys humming with state-of-the-art quietness. Standing at the foot of the bed, reviewing a thick medical chart on a tablet, was a man Claw recognized from a desperate, late-night internet search she had done years ago. It was Dr. Joseph Leventhal, one of the premier kidney transplant surgeons in the country, a pioneer in utilizing regulatory T-cell therapy to prevent organ rejection. He was a man whose wait list was supposedly impossible to bypass. "She's stabilizing, Claw," Dr. Leventhal said, looking up with a calm, authoritative demeanor. He possessed the quiet confidence of a man who saved lives daily. "We have a matching donor lined up. We're prepping her system now, and the transplant surgery is scheduled for Thursday morning." Claw gripped the edge of the hospital tray, her knuckles turning white. "A donor? How? We've been on the list for 3.5 years. We were told she might not make it to the end of the month. And I can't pay for this. I don't even have insurance that covers a fraction of a consultation with you. let alone a transplant. The administrative and financial hurdles have been entirely handled, Dr. Leventhal interrupted, offering a polite, professional smile that betrayed absolutely nothing. My explicit instructions were simply to provide the absolute best medical care for Beatrice. I'll leave you two alone so she can rest before the pre-op procedures begin. As the renowned surgeon swept out of the room, Claw felt a cold, heavy knot tighten in the pit of her stomach. She knew exactly who had issued those explicit instructions. She kissed her mother's forehead, pulled her thin coat on, and marched out of the hospital. Claw took the L train downtown, her stomach churning with a mixture of profound gratitude and absolute terror. The business card in her pocket felt heavier than lead. Apex Holdings occupied the top 5 floors of a gleaming, modern glass skyscraper in the Loop. From the outside, it didn't look like a Mafia stronghold. It looked like a Fortune 500 powerhouse. The lobby was lined with imported Italian marble, and security personnel in tailored suits discreetly monitored the perimeter. Matteo was waiting for her by the private elevators. The scarred enforcer didn't say a word, didn't even offer a greeting. He simply scanned a black keycard, and the elevator doors slid open. They rode up in absolute silence to the penthouse level. When the doors opened, Claw stepped into an office that was larger than her entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and the churning, dark waters of Lake Michigan. Lawrence Bianchi sat behind a massive desk carved from solid mahogany. He wasn't wearing his intimidating charcoal suit today. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and faded, intricate ink. "You transferred my mother," Claw said, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Her fear had been entirely eclipsed by a desperate need for answers. Lawrence didn't immediately look up from the leather-bound file he was reviewing. "Dr. Joseph Leventhal is the best in the Midwest. His T-cell therapy protocol practically guarantees a 0% rejection rate. Your mother will have a new kidney by Thursday, and her post-op care is fully funded for the next 10 years. "Why?" Claw demanded, stepping closer to the desk, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You bought my ex-boyfriend's debt. You had your men beat him and drag him out of a diner. Now you're paying what must be millions of dollars to save my mother's life. What do you want from me? If this is about the $30,000 Tyler stole, Tyler owes me nothing." Lawrence finally looked up, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with a chilling intensity. He closed the file. "Tyler's debt was sold to a tertiary collection agency I happen to own through a shell company. When my automated systems flagged your name as the guarantor, I had Matteo look into the situation. As for your ex-boyfriend, he is currently on a one-way freight transport to northern Alaska, with strict, agonizing instructions never to return to the lower 48. You will never have to look at his face again." Claw's breath hitched in her throat. The casual way he spoke about destroying a man's life was terrifying. "Then what is this? Why are you doing this? Do you want me to work off the debt? Do you want me to run drugs? Launder money?" Lawrence leaned back in his leather chair and let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Claw, you are a diner waitress who panicked when pouring coffee. What possible use would I have for you in my alternative ventures?" He stood up, walking slowly around the desk. His physical presence was overwhelming, a gravitational pull in the center of the room. "I don't want your money. I don't want your labor. I want you to sit down and listen to me." Claw slowly sank into a plush leather guest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass behind Lawrence, framing him in a backdrop of urban gloom. 26 years ago, Lawrence began, walking over to a crystal decanter and pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He slid one across the polished wood of the desk toward Claw. I was 16 years old. My father was dead, gunned down in a warehouse dispute over territory, and my mother was the only family I had left in the world. And she fell ill. Polycystic kidney disease. It was aggressive, and the decline was pure agony. He walked back to the window, staring out at the city he now owned. We didn't have the money, the influence, or the power I possess today. We were nobodies, scraps of the city relying on a brutally underfunded public health system. They put my mother in a crowded, filthy ward at Cook County Hospital. The attending physicians wrote her off immediately. They wouldn't even give her adequate pain medication because they didn't want to waste premium resources on a terminal patient who couldn't pay. Claw listened, captivated by the raw, unspoken grief vibrating beneath his calm, measured tone. The cold mob boss was gone, replaced momentarily by the ghost of a terrified teenager. But there was a nurse, Lawrence continued, turning his head slightly to look at Claw. A young floor nurse who absolutely refused to let my mother die in agony. She fought the doctors, screaming at them in the hallways. She stole extra pillows and blankets from the pediatric ward to keep my mother warm. When the pain became too much for my mother to bear, that nurse would clock out, pull up a chair by her bed, and hold her hand for hours, humming to her, so she wouldn't be afraid of the dark. Lawrence walked back to the desk, leaning against the edge, towering over Claw. The hospital administration found out she was smuggling unauthorized, high-grade painkillers from the pharmacy to ease my mother's suffering. They didn't just fire her. They reported her to the medical board. They revoked her nursing license. They ruined her entire career. Claw's heart stopped beating. The room started to spin, the edges of her vision going fuzzy. My mother, she whispered, the fragmented pieces of her life violently clicking into place. Beatrice had never, ever talked about her past career in medicine. She had always told Claw she lost her nursing license due to a minor clerical error, a bureaucratic mistake she simply couldn't afford a lawyer to fight. She had worked grueling, minimum-wage jobs ever since, just to keep a roof over their heads. Beatrice Jenkins, Lawrence said, speaking the name with a heavy reverence that shocked Claw to her core. She gave up her entire livelihood, her entire future, to give my mother dignity in her final days. When my mother finally passed, Beatrice even paid for the cremation out of her own meager pocket, because I didn't have a single dime to my name. Lawrence reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a faded, yellowed receipt from a Chicago funeral home, dated November 1999. It had Beatrice's flowing signature at the bottom. I swore on my mother's ashes that I would repay that debt, Lawrence said, his voice dropping to a fierce, dangerous whisper. It took me 2 decades to claw my way up and build this empire. By the time I had the resources to find her, Beatrice had vanished off the grid, hiding from predatory creditors, working under the table at diners. It was only when your idiot ex-boyfriend used her address for that payday loan that my algorithms flagged her name. Claw was crying now, silent, hot tears tracking down her pale cheeks. So you came to the diner. I came to the diner to observe, Lawrence corrected, his dark eyes softening just a fraction. To see if it was really her, to see what her life had become. And when I saw you, a terrified, exhausted girl, willing to stand between me, Matteo, and a bullet just to protect your mother's sleep, I saw the exact same fire. You are your mother's daughter, Claw. He walked back to his heavy leather chair and sat down, lacing his fingers together. The medical bills are wiped clean. The transplant is paid for. The penthouse suite at Northwestern is hers until she is fully recovered. She will never want for anything again. Lawrence then slid a thick, embossed folder across the desk. And as for you? I need an executive assistant for my legitimate real estate holdings. I need someone with an actual spine, someone who isn't afraid to look me in the eye and tell me no when I'm being unreasonable. The starting salary is $250,000 a year with full benefits. You start on Monday. Claw stared at the folder, then up at the ruthless, terrifying man who controlled the city's darkest shadows. He wasn't a hero. He was a monster to most. But to her and to her mother, he was the absolute salvation they had prayed for. "Why?" Claw managed to choke out, wiping her eyes. "You didn't have to go this far. You could have just paid off the loan. In my world, Claw, loyalty is the only currency that actually matters," Lawrence said softly, looking out at the rain. "Your mother bought my loyalty 26 years ago. Consider the debt paid in full." The diner uniform went into the trash, replaced by tailored suits. Claw thrived in Lawrence's corporate empire, fiercely loyal to the man who saved her family. Beatrice received a new kidney, completely unaware that the ruthless billionaire funding her recovery was the desperate teenage boy she had comforted decades ago. In a city of shadows, one single act of forgotten kindness had ultimately become their absolute, life-saving grace.